one housekeeping matter I wanted to tell the jurors about. I do have a cell phone out. It's not so I can text my wife. Karen and I sometimes communicate by text because that's easier than getting up and actually talking to each other. That will mostly be centered around the breaks, although if I have some question about something I'm seeing, I could be texting her. That's the only person I will be texting while we're in the courtroom, and it's only for official purposes. I just didn't want you to think I was doing something else. Ms. Erger, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Hold on. Mr. Spies, are you ready to proceed?
We are.
Ms. Erger, would you please read the indictment for us?
Yes, Your Honor. In the Iowa District Court, in and for Lynn County, State of Iowa plaintiff versus Drew Allen Blahnik, defendant. FECR 133722, indictment. The grand jurors of Lynn County accused Drew Allen Blahnik of the crimes of count 1, murder in the first degree, committed as follows. That said, Drew Allen Blahnik, on or about December 14, 2018, in the county of Lynn and the state of Iowa, did unlawfully and willfully, deliberately, with premeditation, actively participate in killing Christopher Bagley with malice aforethought at 1700 Mount Vernon Road Southeast, lot number 26 in Cedar Rapids, Lynn County, Iowa, in violation of section 707.1 and 707.2 parent A, 1 parent A of the Iowa Criminal Code. Count 2, obstructing prosecution, committed as follows. That the said Drew Allen Blahnik, between and including December 14th and December 21st, 2018, in the county of Lynn and the state of Iowa, did unlawfully and willfully destroy, alter, or conceal physical evidence with the intent to prevent the apprehension or obstruct the prosecution of another in Cedar Rapids, Lynn County, Iowa, in violation of section 719.3 parent 1 of the Iowa Criminal Code. Count 3, abuse of a corpse, committed as follows. That the said Drew Allen Blahnik, between and including December 14th and December 21st, 2018, in the county of Lynn and the state of Iowa, did unlawfully and willfully hide or bury a human corpse with the intent to conceal a crime in Cedar Rapids, Lynn County, Iowa, in violation of section 708.14, parent 1, parent B of the Iowa Criminal Code. A true bill, signed Darren Farmer, grand jury foreman. And to this indictment, the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty.
Thank you, Ms. Erger. At this time, the attorneys have an opportunity to make what we call opening statements. In doing so, they may explain to you what they believe are the issues in the case and what they expect the evidence will show. The statements which they will make and the arguments they will later make after all the evidence has been received are not evidence and may not be considered by you as evidence. Further, any statements they may make about the law are not to be considered as the law of the case. Because evidence often comes piecemeal and out of chronological order or logical sequence in the trial of a lawsuit, the statements of counsel are merely to put the facts in perspective. They are intended to give you a thumbnail sketch of the case and outline the evidence to better aid you in understanding the issues and the evidence. Therefore, please give them your full attention. Ms. Erger, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. May it please the court, counsel, opposing counsel. Christopher Bagley was 31 years old when he was murdered. He did not die from natural causes. An autopsy showed that Christopher Bagley died from 17 sharp force wounds. Many of those wounds were to the neck and torso. The facts will show that Christopher Bagley suffered a violent and brutal end to his life. The facts will also show that after he was murdered, Chris Bagley was buried in the backyard of one of the suspects. He was buried in a desperate attempt to hide his body and the evidence of the crime. We will prove when, where, and how Christopher Bagley was murdered. More importantly, we will prove who killed Christopher Bagley. The facts will show that the defendant, Drew Blahnik, stabbed Christopher Bagley to death, and that it was not an act of self-defense. The facts will show that the defendant was also working with an accomplice to kill Christopher Bagley. Courtney Bagley remembers the last time she heard from her husband, Chris. It was a text message she received on December 13th, 2018. In that text message, he said he loved her and that he would see her the next day as they had plans to go Christmas shopping for their children. Chris loved the holidays. He never showed up for that shopping trip. Although Courtney did not know it at the time, when she was waiting for Chris to show up, he was already dead. Courtney Bagley did not report Chris, her husband, missing right away. She was holding out hope that there was a reason for his absence and that he would show up. But on December 17th, after not hearing from Chris for a few days, which was unusual, she reached out to a friend, Dan Castle, and together they filed a missing person report. A deputy with the Lynn County Sheriff's Office met them, took the report, and started a sequence of events that turned this from a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The facts will show that Christopher Bagley was murdered in the early morning hours of December 14th, 2018. He was murdered in a trailer owned by Paul Hoff in the 7100 block of Mount Vernon Road, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The facts will show that earlier that night, Christopher Bagley was picked up from his residence by a friend by the name of Lydia Oline. The two of them proceeded to Paul Hoff's trailer, where Paul Hoff was with another female by the name of Chris and Marty. While at the trailer, Chris Bagley and Paul Hoff spoke about committing a robbery on a group they referred to as the Slew Crew. They wanted Lydia to drive them, but she declined. while the four of them were inside of the trailer, security video showed that a pickup truck was circling Paul Hoff's trailer court. There were two men inside of that truck. Drew Wagner was driving, and the defendant was the passenger. They were looking for someone. They were looking for Christopher Bagley. The facts will show that Wagner and the defendant passed through the trailer court, but did not stop because they did not see Christopher Bagley's vehicle. That is because Chris and Lydia had arrived in Lydia's car. About 15 minutes later, Drew Wagner called Paul Hoff. He asked Paul if Chris was there, and Paul confirmed that he was. After receiving that confirmation, Drew Wagner and the defendant returned to the trailer. They were looking for Christopher Bagley because they had a plan to kill him. When the defendant and Drew Wagner entered the trailer, only Paul Hoff and Christopher Bagley remained. The two women had already left. The facts will show that Drew Wagner pulled Paul Hoff aside and told him that they were going to mess up Christopher Bagley. They couldn't have Paul Hoff interfering with their plan. Drew Wagner then staged a confrontation with Christopher Bagley by engaging him in a shoving match. During that confrontation, the defendant joined in and stabbed Christopher Bagley 17 times, killing him. During what was a frenzied stabbing attack, the defendant inadvertently stabbed his own accomplice, Drew Wagner. He stabbed him in the hand while Drew Wagner had Christopher Bagley in a headlock. Paul Hoff witnessed this incident, and he did not interfere. After the murder was committed, Christopher Bagley's body was wrapped in a bedsheet and a plastic tarp and pushed out the back window of the trailer into the bed of Drew Wagner's truck. Drew Wagner and the defendant then left the trailer, driving the truck with Christopher Bagley's body in the back, covered by plywood. After leaving the trailer, they proceeded to Drew Wagner's residence on Cedar Avenue Southeast. Later that morning, the defendant went to work with a friend, Dan Castle. They worked together in concrete, and they had a job to complete off of Beaver Avenue. Dan Castle picked up the defendant from his residence in Marion, Iowa, and they proceeded to the job site where they worked into the early afternoon. While the defendant was working, Drew Wagner returned to Paul Hoff's trailer to help remove evidence of the crime. He helped Paul clean up the trailer and remove and discard part of the floor that contained blood from where Chris was killed. After cleaning up the trailer, Drew Wagner contacted a man by the name of Andy Shaw. He informed Andy Shaw that Christopher Bagley was dead. The facts will show that Christopher Bagley and Andy Shaw had some tension between them, and that Chris had caused Andy a lot of problems. Drew Wagner then met up with Andy Shaw and received a large amount of money and drugs. He proceeded to the job site on Beaver Avenue, where the defendant was located, and he shared that money and drugs with the defendant. Sergeant Dave Buter with the Lynn County Sheriff's Department was assigned as lead investigator on this case. He, along with the help of other agencies, uncovered information that led to locating the body of Christopher Bagley. They were able to determine that Chris was last seen at Paul Hoff's trailer. They went and questioned Paul Hoff. Paul Hoff admitted that Chris was there the morning of December 14th. Paul Hoff denied having any knowledge of what happened, and he would not let deputies check inside of his trailer. In the following weeks, things started to heat up, and the secret of Chris Bagley's death began to unravel. A series of Facebook posts was made by Drew Wagner referencing an injury that he sustained the night that Chris was killed, and later referenced how all of this was an act of self-defense. During that time, additional actions were made in furtherance of hiding evidence concerning the death of Christopher Bagley. This included Drew Wagner providing the truck used to transport Christopher Bagley to a friend that was working on his home. Drew Wagner wanted to get rid of that truck because he was worried there would be residual evidence that could still be found. The first domino to fall in the sequence of events leading to the arrest of those who killed Christopher Bagley was Paul Hoff. Paul Hoff was arrested in mid-February and was found with methamphetamine and guns. When questioned, Paul Hoff provided information about how the defendant and Drew Wagner had killed Christopher Bagley inside of his trailer. A later search of that trailer showed what appeared to be Chris Bagley's blood inside of it. Paul Hoff spoke about the events he observed back on December 14, 2018. Although Paul Hoff was not forthcoming at the beginning, he eventually provided information that assisted in locating Christopher Bagley's body. After the disclosure from Paul Hoff, investigators obtained a search warrant for Drew Wagner's residence on Cedar Avenue. Drew Wagner was present when investigators arrived to perform the search. At that time, Drew Wagner admitted that he was at Paul Hoff's trailer on December 14th, 2018. He admitted that the defendant was there. He then followed their plan by claiming there was a confrontation with Christopher Bagley, and he admitted that the defendant had stabbed Chris that night. Drew Wagner was not entirely forthcoming. However, later he did come forward and provided information as to what happened. The next week, a search was conducted of the defendant's residence in Marion, Iowa. After the search, investigators questioned the defendant. The defendant was questioned at length about the disappearance and the murder of Christopher Bagley. During that interview, the defendant insisted that he knew nothing. He knew nothing about the disappearance of Christopher Bagley. For roughly 4 hours, the defendant denied having any knowledge whatsoever. The defendant, he said he had no clue and literally no involvement in the murder and disappearance of Chris. He also denied even being at Paul Hoff's trailer that morning. Eventually, he admitted that he stabbed Christopher Bagley, but that it was an act of self-defense. The secrets kept by the defendant, his accomplice, Drew Wagner, and Paul Hoff further began to unravel when investigators learned that Drew Wagner had rented a ground warmer and that it was at his residence. Investigators also learned there was a skid loader on the property. The facts will show that on February 28th, 2019, a search was conducted at Drew Wagner's residence on Cedar Avenue. During that search, investigators located the body of Christopher Bagley. Christopher Bagley was buried next to the garage at the residence. On March 1st, 2019, the body of Christopher Bagley was removed from the ground and taken to the state medical examiner, where an autopsy was performed. The pathologist will testify that she performed an autopsy and found that Christopher Bagley had suffered 17 sharp force wounds to his body. She will testify that she did not observe any defensive wounds on Christopher Bagley. She examined the clothing, which you will see, took photographs, and performed various screenings on his body. The facts will show that the death of Christopher Bagley was not an act of self-defense. This was a premeditated, intentional killing. The defendant and his accomplice, Drew Wagner, staged this deadly confrontation and invented a story to fall back on in case they got caught or they could no longer deny their involvement. They devised this plan prior to the murder and executed that plan while at Paul Hoff's trailer and months after the murder. The plan played out just as they had hoped. Arrive at Paul Hoff's trailer, alert Paul Hoff they were going to mess up Christopher Bagley so that he wouldn't interfere. Wagner was then to stage an argument with Chris, and during that argument, the defendant was going to jump in and kill Christopher Bagley. Conflicting accounts will say that a gun fell onto the floor. The facts will show that was not a factor, and that it posed absolutely no danger to the defendant or Drew Wagner. Throughout this trial, you will hear testimony from those who were there when Chris was murdered. The accomplice, Drew Wagner, and eyewitness, Paul Hoff, have signed an agreement to provide complete and truthful testimony. And yes, you will learn that they are both getting concessions for their cooperation and assistance. But they were present when the defendant stabbed and killed Christopher Bagley. And they will tell you this was not a case of self-defense. The facts will show not only how Christopher Bagley was killed, but why. As stated, Drew Wagner called Andy Shaw after cleaning up at Paul Hoff's to alert him that Christopher Bagley was dead. The facts will show that prior to Chris Bagley's death, he was having issues with Andy Shaw. Courtney Bagley will testify that her husband, Chris, was scared. He was scared of Andy Shaw. He was being threatened. He was receiving Snapchat messages. He was scared. She will testify that the last time she saw her husband, Christopher Bagley, it seemed like he knew something was going to happen to him, that something was off. The evidence will also show that Christopher Bagley had been involved in a series of burglaries and robberies of properties owned by Andy Shaw. Testimony will show that back in October of 2018, officers responded to an assault and robbery of Andy Shaw at his business. The perpetrator? Christopher Bagley. Paul Hoff was there as well. There was another burglary in late November 2018 to one of Andy Shaw's businesses. And on November 30th, 2018, shortly before Christopher Bagley was murdered, there was a road rage incident between Andy Shaw and Christopher Bagley. The facts will show that Andy Shaw did not follow up on charges against Christopher Bagley for that incident. Instead, the facts will show that he sought his own type of justice with the help of the defendant and Drew Wagner. You will hear testimony about the relationship between Andy Shaw and the defendant. The defendant was the muscle or the security for Andy Shaw. You will hear testimony that Andy Shaw compensated the defendant and Drew Wagner with substantial amounts of cash and drugs for killing Christopher Bagley. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case where two defendants collaborated to commit a gruesome and brutal murder. Drew Wagner, the accomplice, starting the fight, and the defendant, Drew Blahnik, joining in and stabbing Christopher Bagley. They then buried his body and desperately tried to hide evidence of their horrible crime. Neither Drew Wagner or the defendant reported this matter to police after it occurred. Instead, the secret of the defendant's involvement was kept for as long as it could be. The defendant was not truthful when he was first questioned about the disappearance, as you will see in the interview. And as the evidence will show, the defendant claimed self-defense only when that secret began to unravel and the truth came to light. After Chris Bagley was killed, he was buried twice. Once by those involved in his death, and once by his family. One was a proper burial, and the other done in haste and desperation by his killers, trying to hide evidence of what had been done. The truth about what happened to Christopher Bagley was kept secret for over 2 months as his family, friends, and loved ones anguished, and his body lay frozen, buried in the ground next to Drew Wagner's garage. The facts are going to come out at this trial, and we believe that the facts will lead you to conclude that this is in no way a case of self-defense, and that the defendant, Drew Blahnik, is guilty as charged on all 3 counts. Thank you.
Mr. Spees, would you like a moment to prepare the courtroom?
I would, Your Honor, yes.
You may have one.
We're wired up.
Blahnik.
Men and women of the jury, I will be short. On December 14, 2018, Drew Blahnik, my client, stabbed Christopher Bagley and then pricked the trailer of Paul Hoff. He did it because at the time, in a split second, he reasonably believed that Drew Wagner and Chris Bagley were engaged in a death struggle, and that Chris Bagley was armed with a gun. And based on that, he killed Mr. Bagley, not with a weapon that he had brought to Paul Hoff's trailer, but with a gun that was, with a knife that was within hand's reach of him, a knife that was already at Paul Hoff's trailer. Yes, Mr. Blahnik killed Chris Bagley, but he did not commit murder. He did not remove the body of Chris Bagley from Paul Hoff's trailer. He did not help to bury Chris Bagley in the backyard of Drew Wagner. In fact, Mr. Blahnik wanted to call the police, but he was threatened at gunpoint by Paul Hoff. Don't do it, because it's going to lead the police to my trailer where I've got illegal guns and illegal drugs. This was the threat that Paul Hoff continued to make during the weeks that followed the death of Chris Bagley. The investigation, as we well know, led eventually to Mr. Blahnik. And I refer to him as Mr. Blahnik because we have two Drews in the texture here. It led to Mr. Blahnik, and he was in fact questioned by the police about what he knew. And as it comes as no surprise, and as many of you talked about during jury selection, the person first investigated is going to deny involvement, and Mr. Blahnik did. Eventually, he had confessed to having killed Mr. Bagley. He talked about the struggle that took place. He talked about the gun, the vision of the gun that he saw in Chris Bagley's hand as Drew Wagner and Bagley were engaged in this struggle. There's no question that he denied involvement at the outset. He admitted that he was involved and told how he had killed Chris Bagley. In fact, testified before the grand jury about what he knew, what he did, and why he did it. Now, many of you during jury selection said you wanted to know about Chris Bagley and what led up to this deadly encounter. And I want to make it very plain, Chris Bagley is not on trial. But you're going to hear information about, as you've heard already, Mr. Bagley's involvement in drugs, in guns, in robberies, and the threats and the harm that he placed himself in. And you're going to hear about this, and in fact, on the night that he showed up at Paul Hoff's trailer, he wanted to commit a robbery. He wanted to recruit Paul Hoff to be involved in this robbery. He left the trailer, and of course, we know that there was a fatal encounter that happened right after that. Now, you also are going to need to know about Paul Hoff. Paul Hoff was at his trailer where this deadly encounter took place. You're also going to hear, of course, a lot about Drew Wagner. Now, these two men were also involved in gun running, in drug trafficking, in strong arming, in robberies, and the facts are going to reinforce that based on all this information, that Drew Blahnik had a reasonable perception of the deadly encounter. He had a reasonable perception that he was himself in danger, and all of this information, much of it coming from Paul Hoff and Drew Wagner, who we have already heard make deals, yes, deals, with the government. And you're going to hear about the details of those deals and the self-interest that motivated Paul Hoff and Drew Wagner to come forward and to testify. Not civic duty, but self-interest. Now, their involvement in drug trafficking and guns and the threats that they made to Mr. Blahnik are going to be very instrumental in explaining not only what happened, but also why Drew Blahnik was reticent about coming forward with the information and why he eventually did. Now, the deals that were struck by the government are going to be very, very important for your understanding of their credibility and what weight you should give to their evidence. He also said during jury selection that he wanted to know about Drew Blahnik. Drew Blahnik after high school, had the chance to go play football in college. He turned down that chance because he wanted to enlist in the United States Army. He wanted to enlist in the United States Army because of the sense of duty and wanted to help. His career in the United States Army eventually led him through training and mission to Afghanistan. His training and mission in Afghanistan involved daily encounters with death. And during his time and his 2 tours in Afghanistan, he carried out raids, he conducted airborne assaults, he was involved in search and rescue missions to save other soldiers. He was also a sniper, and he was engaged in sniper operations. This is a service that every day placed Drew Blahnik in positions where he was behind boulders, he was in doorways, he was in alleys. In each of those instances, whether in the mountains of Afghanistan or in the alleys or the doorways of Mosul, faced him in positions where he daily faced death. His service in Afghanistan, his service for the United States Army, and his encounters in Afghanistan, in which he killed men, he killed enemy combatants, he also had best friends killed before his very eyes. These encounters live with him daily. He experiences these encounters every night. And it's important not only to put flesh on the bones of Mr. Blahnik, to explain why he reacted the way that he did in that night. So why should he care about his service in the armed forces? And you said in jury selection you thought his combat experience was going to be important, engaging not only why he did what he did, but what was in his head at the time. We know, of course, that because of the circumstances and because of Mr. Blahnik's training, it is completely improbable that he would be involved in a conspiracy to kill somebody with a knife in a trailer. He had proficiency with weapons. He had opportunities to, if he was involved, to lure Mr. Bagley somewhere else in the country, someplace where he could be killed. It just didn't happen that way because it didn't happen that way. Secondly, if Mr. Blahnik was involved in this situation, he also had a concealed weapons permit, and he had access to weapons that he could have used to kill Mr. Bagley. He didn't do it. Now, moreover, we also need to know the importance of Drew Blahnik's wartime experience on his perception of the threat that was made against him. Remember that in this situation, he saw 2 men involved in a deadly struggle, one of whom he believed, Chris Bagley, was armed with a dangerous weapon. And seeing that, he reacted instinctively, he reacted in a split second, he reacted in the way that he had been trained to dispatch the threat as fast as possible. And of course, there were multiple wounds, but he acted in a way that was intended to immediately end the struggle and end the threat, not only to Mr. Wagner, but the threat that he perceived to himself. This was not started by Mr. Wagner. It started by Mr. Wagner. And Drew's split-second response was understandable based on the threat that he saw, based on his understanding of the danger, the deadly danger to himself and to Mr. Wagner. So under the circumstances facing him, he did what he had to do. He did not remove the body from the trailer. He did not take the body to Drew Wagner's house and bury it in Drew Wagner's property. This is absolutely improbable that this was a planned hit that would be carried out so poorly. It was rather an act of impulse, an act of reaction that was based on both panic and fear and split-second response. Now, I will be clear, and it comes as no surprise based on what you've already heard and what you can surmise, that Drew Blahnik was involved in drugs. He knew drug dealers. He got too close to the flame of that kind of criminality based on the people that he knew. He had drug issues himself, which again comes as no surprise based on where he'd been and what he'd gone through. This led to a fatal encounter. It led to his fatal encounter at Paul Hoff's trailer. It led to the incident that led to Chris Bagley's death. But this was not premeditated by Drew Blahnik. It was not premeditated based on what he knew in any conspiracy involving him. It was one triggered by an intense, physical, deadly encounter between Drew Wagner and Chris Bagley, one that triggered a response from Drew Blahnik. He did not act out of any design or premeditation. He acted out of instinct. Now, ladies and gentlemen, your duty, as the judge has made very clear to you, and as you have understood during jury selection, is two things. Number one, your duty is to hold the government to its obligation to prove its case beyond any reasonable doubt, if it can. And your other duty is to Drew Blahnik, and that is to honor and guard his presumption of innocence. And I know you will. And I know that following all the evidence, following the inferences that you can draw from it, getting to know Drew Blahnik, that your verdict must be not guilty.
Thank you, counsel. Are we ready to call the state's recess or first witness, or do I need to take a brief recess at this point?
Your Honor, we're ready to call our first witness.
Okay, the state may now call the first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Courtney Bagley.
Ms. Bagley, before you sit down, would you please raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
You may take your seat. Please make sure you speak into the mic. We have bad acoustics in this room. Please state your full name for the record and spell your last name.
Courtney Bagley, Bagley.
Your witness, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you doing today?
About as well as possible.
Courtney, tell us where you work.
I currently just graduated nursing school and I'm waiting to start my job at Mercy Labor and Delivery.
And I'm going to ask you to move that red mic a little bit closer to you so we can hear you. And where are you from?
I live in Ryan.
And how do you know Christopher Bagley?
We met through friends in 2009.
And tell me a little bit about your relationship, the beginning of it.
So we just met around randomly through two of our friends. They wanted to go to a party together and invited us to go. And like, ever since that night, we were pretty much inseparable. We had 2 kids, got married, bought a house, did the American dream.
What year were you guys married?
2016.
And you said you had 2 children. Tell me how Chris was as a father.
He loved his kids. The second that he heard that they were coming into the world, he was just skipping through the hospital hallways, just running up and down on them. He would go in and kiss them goodnight even after they fell asleep and had their night kisses. And holidays and birthdays, he just was ecstatic, overboard with them. It just was his world.
And when did things take a turn in your relationship with Chris?
I'd say 2018, he was not making great choices, and I had to ask him to step back a little bit and just kind of think about it because we have the kids to take care of.
And when you say that he wasn't making great choices, tell me what you mean by that.
He was using drugs, and I found out later he was selling them.
Excuse me, Your Honor, maybe we urge the witness to get a little bit closer to the microphone.
Ma'am, why don't I have you move that notebook that's there so you can move the microphone closer? There you go. Thank you.
How did that affect your relationship with Chris?
I asked him to maybe find somewhere else to stay for a while just so that we could think about things, and the kids take him first, but he still saw the kids every day, and he still called every night, and he still checked on them, and he always was there for us no matter what.
When did he move out of the home you and him shared?
Father's Day of 2018.
After he moved out, tell me a little bit about your relationship with Chris at that time.
He still was always there for me. I'd call him and he'd answer, and if I needed anything with the kids, he was right there to do it, and he'd show up with takeout food, and he was always there. He'd come and put the kids to bed almost every single night, and we still loved each other, just needed a minute.
To your knowledge, was he romantically involved with anybody else after he had moved out?
Yes.
What did you know about that?
I knew that there was another woman, and he admitted to it.
Do you know who that other woman was?
Kaylee Anderson?
And did you know her personally at all?
No, I had never met her in my life.
And while Chris was involved with Kaylee Anderson, did you and him remain close?
Yes,
And how often did you speak with Chris?
pretty much every day.
While Chris was living away, did he ever indicate to you that he was scared or in fear?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So we had our son's Christmas concert the Monday before he died, and it was a great night. Our son was the only one up there dancing and singing, and we get back, and he just sat on the kitchen floor and he bawled, and he just said, "I just don't want to do this. I just want to be normal. I want to help. Please help me." And we were looking at rehab facilities for him.
What else did you observe with Chris's behavior at that time?
He started to get very paranoid and anxious. He was always looking over his shoulder, and he was always nervous, and he had said that Andy had put a hit out on him, and that he was scared to even drive his own vehicles.
And when you say Andy, who are you referring to?
Andrew Shaw.
Did you know Andrew Shaw?
We went to high school together.
What, if anything else, did you know about Chris and Andy's relationship?
I knew that he had rented a shop from him because he was going to do concrete sinks and countertops, and later I found out that that's where Chris was purchasing drugs from.
Do you know if Chris was receiving any messages from Andy Shaw?
Yes.
Did you personally observe any of those messages?
Yes, he screenshotted and sent it to me when he got a message from Andy.
How did Chris receive that message?
Snapchat.
How did that come to your attention?
He called me and he said, if anything ever happens to me, give this to the cops because this is proof right here.
And Courtney, in front of you, there's a ring, white binder. Will you please turn to Exhibit 99? You got it pulled up?
Yep.
Okay. And Courtney, have you seen this photograph before?
Yes.
And what is this a photograph of?
A Snapchat message between Chris and Andy.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the photo that was sent to you by Christopher Bagley?
Yes, this is what I turned into the police.
Your Honor, state moves to admit State's Exhibit 99.
Mr. Spees,
Without objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 99 is admitted.
Thank you. Permission to publish?
Permission granted.
Courtney, will you explain what we're seeing here?
So Chris is where he was living. He got raided and he asked Andrew to help pay for a lawyer. And Andy essentially told him, sorry, bud, you're on your own. People go missing every day.
And in this message, will you indicate which is Andy?
The blue
The other, who is that?
Chris.
Thank you. Moving on. At some point, did Chris move back into your residence?
Yes.
When was that?
Like late October, early November.
Once he had moved back into the house, tell me about what was going on.
Things were starting to be kind of normal, but we got to the point where we had vehicles driving by our house, sitting in our alley, right next to my kid's window, just sitting there at nighttime. I have certain video of them, and it just got worse, the harassment, and Andy would drive by our house all the time, and it became like scary.
Did you know Drew Wagner?
No,
Did you know the defendant, Drew Blahnik?
no,
Did you know Paul Hoff?
I had met him one time in passing when he dropped Chris off at home.
Were you ever contacted by Andy Shaw?
I was.
Tell me about that.
He would text me Chris's locations and where he was staying at if he wasn't home. He would send me pictures of like our vehicles, and it just became very much harassment.
Do you know if Chris owned a firearm?
Yes,
Do you know what kind of gun it was?
it was like a silver revolver with like a pearl handle.
When was the last time that you saw Chris?
The night of December 13th.
Tell me about what you did that night.
I had a work retirement party to go to, so he was home watching the kids, and I got home and he was just pacing around the house. He was very nervous, down to the point where he changed the security code for the cameras outside, and he just kept saying that he loved me, and he's just very like nervous.
Once you got home, what did you do next?
I got home and I talked to him for a little bit, and then we put the kids to bed and I went to bed.
Did you and Chris have plans the next day?
Yes.
Tell me about those plans.
We were gonna go Christmas shopping for our two kids. We were supposed to meet after I got off work.
Did Chris like the holidays?
Loved them. Like, I remember our parents always used to tell us, like, you guys go way too overboard. You need to not do that. Like, just crazy birthday parties, crazy Christmases, Easters, everything was just extra. And it was all him. It wasn't me.
Did Chris seem excited to go Christmas shopping?
Yes, he was looking forward to it. All our daughter wanted was a Barbie dream house.
Once you went to bed, what do you recall next?
I heard my friend Dave come in. Well, it's Chris's friend. They've been friends since before we met. And I was like, what are you doing? Because Chris had left. He said he had something to do and he'd be back. And Dave's like, well, Chris called me over here. And then we called Chris and he came back for a minute.
Once Chris came back, what did you do next?
I just sat and talked to him for a minute. He kissed me on my forehead and told me he loved me. And then he left, and then Dave left, and I went back to bed.
Before you went back to bed the second time, did you notice anything unusual about Chris's demeanor?
Yes, like the way that he told me he loved me was like he would never see me again. But he loved me, like just the hardest kiss he's ever given me. The most affirmative, I love you. You know that. Like, I'll see you tomorrow. I love you. And that was the last time I ever saw him.
Do you know if Chris stayed home the rest of the night?
No, he didn't leave.
Tell me what you know about Chris leaving the house that night.
He just said he was leaving and that he'd be back. And I later found out that he had left with Lydia Oline.
And did you know Lydia Oline?
No.
Do you know if he had any weapons on him when he left?
I did not see him take a weapon with him.
Once Chris had left, did he contact you again?
Yes, he sent me another text telling me that he loved me and telling me good night.
And did you receive any other correspondence from him after that text message?
No, that was the last time I ever heard from him.
What do you recall from the next day, December 14th, 2018?
I got up, went to work, took the kids to daycare. Well, took the kids to daycare, then work. And
Took the kids one.
to daycare and then work. And then I got off work and I went to the mall because I was supposed to meet Chris. And I kept calling him and he never showed up.
Was it unusual for him not to answer the phone?
No, he always had it on him.
How were you feeling at that time?
I was kind of mad because I'm like, what? We had plans, and then I started to get worried.
Was it common for you to go multiple days without speaking to Chris?
No, not at all.
Did you make any additional contact with Lydia Oline that day?
I had not even spoke to her that day. She contacted me 2 days later to bring me his wallet and his sweatshirt.
Do you know why she had those items?
She said that he left them in her car.
How did you decide that you were going to file a missing person report for Chris?
Because it had been, we were going on 4 days and his phone was now going straight to voicemail. Everybody was getting worried, and so I was like, it's time, we have to do this.
Did you reach out to anybody else before making the report?
Yes, I contacted Dan Castle.
And how do you know Dan Castle?
Chris and Dan used to work together at Jason Smith Concrete.
At where?
Jason Smith Concrete. We had known him for probably close to 10 years.
Do you recall what day you reported Chris missing?
It was the Monday after.
After you had reported Chris missing, tell me how you were feeling.
I was scared for my life. I was nervous. I was anxious. I was scared for my kids. I didn't even stay at my house the whole time.
Tell me about the day that you found out they had located the body of Christopher Bagley.
So Dave Buter informed us. We were pulled in on, I want to say it was like Tuesday possibly. I'm not Tuesday or Wednesday. And he said, we found out that Drew Blahnik and Drew Wagner had killed Chris and that they were hoping to find his body within the next couple days. And then we got the call on Friday saying that they had recovered him and that Dave Buter was going to go with him to the medical examiner to make sure that he got there.
The last night that you saw Chris, did you and him fight at all?
No, we were getting along just fine.
I have nothing further, Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Spees, do you have cross-exam?
I do, thank you. Ms. Bagley, tell us please what the reason for your separation from Mr. Bagley was.
Because of his drug use.
And what was his drug of choice?
At that time, it was marijuana.
Pardon me?
At that time, it was marijuana.
And had he used other drugs as well?
I found out later he used methamphetamine.
Do you know how he was using methamphetamine?
No, I never saw him personally use it.
In fact, one of the reasons that you wanted him out of the house was because you didn't want drugs in the house.
Correct.
Were you aware that he was dealing drugs?
I found out later on, yes,
And how did you find out that he was dealing drugs?
because he told me.
Did he tell you what kind of drugs he was dealing?
He said marijuana.
Did he tell you he was dealing with any other drugs?
No,
Did you see what is called drug paraphernalia in the house?
only after the cops searched it.
Pardon me?
Only after the cops searched it.
And what did they find that you saw?
Methamphetamine pipes.
Where were those pipes at?
I'm not sure.
Do you know what the effects are of using methamphetamine?
Paranoia, alertness, or having increased heart rate.
Did you see those sorts of symptoms in your husband?
Saw paranoia.
You told the men and women of the jury and us that on the night of December 13, the last night you saw Mr. Bagley, he left with a woman named Lydia.
Yes.
And I understand that you didn't know who Lydia was.
No, I had only met her maybe a couple of times, but I never talked to her.
Do you know what place Lydia had in your husband's life?
I know that they slept together.
That they what?
They slept together.
Do you know whether they did drugs together?
No, I was not part of that lifestyle.
On the last night that you saw Mr. Bagley, did he pack a bag?
Yes,
What kind of a bag did he pack?
it was like a square duffel bag.
Did you
Like
know
a
what was
what?
in the-
A square duffel bag is,
Do you know what was in the square duffel bag?
no, I saw him just pack, I don't even remember what he put in there. I know he had his phone in there, maybe a bandana, I don't know.
Did anybody bring this square duffel bag back to you?
No,
You told us that Lydia brought back your husband's wallet
yes,
and a sweatshirt
yes,
and a baseball hat.
yes, and a bandana.
Pardon me?
And a bandana?
Thank you, Ms. Bagley. Those are all the questions I have for you.
Thank you.
Ms. Erber, do you have any redirects?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Counsel, may I excuse this witness?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, ma'am, you may step down, you're excused. That means if you wish to now sit through, you're able to do that.
Okay.
Counsel, I think at this point, in light of the fact this is a natural breaking point, we will take our morning recess. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to now be in recess until 10:35. During the recess, please remember the admonition that I gave to you yesterday. For those of you in the front row, when we recess, I want you to make sure the camera's pointed away before. Please be seated.
This Iowa District Court is back in session.
The state may call this next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Deputy John Shookman.
Deputy, before you sit down, please raise your right hand for me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You put your hand down. Please take your seat. Please state and spell your name for the record.
John Shookman, SCHUCHMANN.
Your witness state.
Thank you, Your Honor. Deputy Shookman, where do you work?
For the Lynn County Sheriff's Office,
How long have you worked with the Lynn County Sheriff's Office?
just about 25 years.
And did you graduate from one of the police academies in the state of Iowa?
Yes, I graduated from the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy.
What type of training did you receive?
Full law enforcement training to include investigation of an assortment of cases.
Are you a certified peace officer in the state of Iowa?
Yes, I am.
Were you working in that capacity on December 17, 2018?
Yes, I was.
Do you recall being dispatched to 17 South Mill Street, Walker, Lynn County, Iowa?
Yes, I was.
What was the nature of that dispatch?
I was called in regard to a missing person from that address in Walker.
Do you recall who was the subject of that missing person report?
Yes, the missing person was Christopher Bagley.
What did you do when you arrived at the residence in Walker?
I checked the residence there since I was not far away when dispatched, even though the complainant was not at that address at the time. I just wanted to make sure no one was around and no one had returned, since I've had the experience before with missing persons.
Were you able to locate anyone there?
No, I was not.
Where did you go next?
I went to 1550 9th Avenue in Marion to meet with the complainant.
Who was the complainant?
It was, Courtney Bagley, who also resides at the address with Christopher in Walker.
Was anyone else with her at the time?
Yes, she was there with Dan Castle, who is the residence owner and a friend of hers.
Did they make a missing person report with you?
Yes, they did.
Did they provide you with any details?
Yes, quite a few. And
What did you learn about Christopher Bagley and how he went missing?
he was last seen when he, by Courtney when he left the residence on December 13th with a female friend at around 10 p.m. She picked him up at the residence in Walker at the Mill Street address, and Courtney had not seen him since that time, and did receive one text after that, and had not seen or heard from him since.
Did you do any additional follow-up on this case?
Just my initial investigation at the scene, since other persons came forward and were dealt with by other deputies.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Mr. Spees, do you have any cross-exam for this witness?
Yes, sir, Deputy, did you say there was a vehicle there?
Yes, there was.
And what vehicle was that?
It was a black Ford F-350.
Did you examine the contents of the Ford?
No, I did not. I just did a quick check of the residence to see if there was any activity there or any persons present.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have for you.
Ms. Berger, do you have any redirect exam?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Deputy, you may step down.
Thank you.
State, you may call your next witness.
State calls Morgan Kukla to the stand, Your Honor.
And before you sit down, please raise your right hand for me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You may put your hand down, take your seat. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Morgan Kukla, Morgan, last name Kukla.
Your witness, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Kukla, can you tell us how you're employed?
I'm a police officer at the city of Cedar Rapids in Lynn County, Iowa.
And how long have you been employed as a police officer with the city of Cedar Rapids?
I've been employed since June of 2018 and a certified peace officer in the state of Iowa since October of 2018.
Officer Kukla, can I have you slow down some for us?
Sorry.
Thank you.
You say certified peace officer. Did you have to attend and graduate from one of the Iowa law enforcement academies in order to obtain that certification?
Yes,
Which academy did you graduate from?
the 46th Basic Regional Academy,
And when you say regional, where did that academy take place?
the Cedar Rapids Police Department.
Officer Kukla, how long is the training during the police academy?
It is an 18-week police academy.
And what type of training do you receive while attending?
Anything between investigations, driving, defensive tactics.
Investigations?
Yes.
After having graduated from the academy, have you had to maintain additional continuing education to maintain your certification?
Yes.
And are you current on those trainings?
Yes.
Officer Kukla, after graduation from the academy, are you put in a patrol car and thrown on the street, or what happens once you graduate?
You go through 4 months with a field training officer, and then after that you are solo until you complete 1 year with the police department.
And when you say a field training officer, can you explain to us what it is to be with and what a field training officer is?
A field training officer is selected by the police department specifically to train new recruits on patrol activities, and you ride with one single field training officer for 1 month, and you go through 4 rotations.
Officer, I want to draw your attention to October 27th of 2018. Were you working in your capacity as a police officer on that date?
Yes, I was.
And at that time, were you a solo unit or a partner unit?
I was a partner unit.
Who was your partner at the time?
Officer Jared Ginger.
Can you recall back to 2018 what shift you worked?
I worked the evening shift.
And what hours are included in the evening shift?
It's 5 p.m. to 3 a.m.
As a patrol officer for City of Cedar Rapids, well, let me back up. Were you considered a patrol officer?
I was on field training still.
And what does it mean to be a patrol officer?
You answer calls for service that are sent to you by our dispatch.
As a patrol officer, are you assigned to a specific beat?
Yes.
And can you explain to us what a beat is?
It is a certain section of town that you stay in and answer calls for service.
Do you recall what beat you were assigned to back in October of 2018?
Yes,
And what beat was that?
I was considered Wild City, so I took calls over the entire city.
So not all of the beats are designated by specific areas. Some of you roam the entire city.
That's correct.
I use the term roam loosely. Officer Copeland, do you recall on that shift that evening being dispatched to an address at 1419 Grizzly Drive Northwest in Cedar Rapids?
Yes,
And prior to your arrival at that address, are you generally informed by dispatch what a call is regarding?
yes,
Did you receive that information from dispatch on the 27th regarding why you were being dispatched to the Grizzly Drive address?
yes.
And what information did you receive from dispatch prior to arriving at that location?
We received information that we would be meeting with the caller and that it was in reference to a past assault.
Can you recall approximately what time you received this dispatch?
Approximately 21:45 hours,
And for non-military people, what time is that?
9:45 p.m.
When you arrived at that address, were you able to ascertain who the caller or the complainant was?
Yes,
And who was that?
Andrew Shaw.
When I asked you the question, officer, regarding what the dispatch was in regard to, you said a past assault. When speaking with Andy Shaw, did you determine why it was reported as a past assault?
Yes,
And what did Mr. Shaw report to you when you arrived at Grizzly Drive?
Objection here, Your Honor.
Counsel, could you approach? Private discussion. I'm going to overrule the objection, but I'm going to tell the jury the answer can be considered by you to understand the course of the officer's investigation, why the officer then did whatever she did next, but not for any other purposes. Ma'am, you're able to answer the question. Do you need me to have it read back to you?
yes, please.
Question, and what did Mr. Shaw report to you when you arrived at Grizzly Drive?
He stated that he was assaulted at his business, which was located at 1190 Capitol Drive Southwest.
Officer Kukla, when you first arrived at the Grizzly Drive address, can you describe what, if any, observations you made about the person of Andy Shaw?
I observed that he had several injuries to his facial and neck area.
Can you describe those injuries?
Yes, there was swelling and bruising near his left orbital, along with a laceration, and there was dried and wet blood on the left portion of his neck.
Can you describe what his actual demeanor was at the time that you were speaking with him?
He was very calm.
Did Mr. Shaw identify for you whom he believed was responsible for his injuries?
Yes, he did.
And you said that the assault occurred at a different address.
That is correct.
And what address was that?
1190 Capitol Drive Southwest.
The address at Capitol Drive, were you able to, through your investigation, determine what that address was?
Yes.
And what was it?
It was Mr. Shaw's business.
Commercial property opposed to residential?
Yes.
Did Mr. Shaw tell you during this investigation whom he believed, or who did he tell you he believed was responsible for the assault?
Christopher Bagley.
While speaking with Mr. Shaw, did you and he have conversation regarding going to the Capitol Drive address to further your investigation?
Yes, we did.
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
The question posed doesn't call for hearsay. I overruled, but we'll see what follow-up is, Mr. Spees.
And I made that, Your Honor, only because of the witness's previous answer that was spontaneous.
Go ahead, you can answer the question, officer, if you remember.
Can you repeat it back for me, please?
She had answered, and then.
I'm sorry. So objection is overruled, answer is in. You can ask your next question.
Officer, during your investigation, did yourself and your partner go to the address on Capitol Drive?
Yes, we did.
Can you tell us what you observed at the time that you arrived at that location?
There was an external door that appeared to have been forced open due to damage, and there was a hole in the door, which at the time we believe could possibly be from a gunshot.
And when you say the door appeared to have been forced open, what about the door led you to draw that conclusion?
The door was partially bent near the top of the door frame, and there were several damage marks near where the lock was, so it was not able to close completely.
And on the door, can you describe where you saw this believed gunshot hole?
We believe it was just below the middle of the door.
Officer Kukla, is it typical during your investigations to photograph evidence?
Yes.
During your investigation, did you take photographs of the injuries that you saw to Andy Shaw?
Yes, I did.
Did you also take photographs of the damage to the door that you saw at the Capitol Drive address?
Yes, I did.
Officer Kupo, there is a white 3-ring binder in front of you. If you would open that for me, please. Can you please skip closer to the back to exhibits that have previously been marked as States Exhibit 79, 79A, 79B? Do you see those photographs?
Yes, I do.
After having had a chance to review them, can you tell us what images are contained in states 79, 79A, and 79B?
This is the external door to Mr. Shaw's commercial business.
All 3 photos.
That is correct.
And are those photos those that you took on October 28th of 2018?
Yes.
Can you continue to flip looking at states exhibits 80, 81, and 82? Are those photographs that you took on October 28th of 2018?
Yes.
And what are those photographs of?
The injuries to Mr. Shaw.
Your Honor, at this time, state moves to admit states exhibits 79, 79A, 79B, 80, 81, and 82.
Mr. Spees, do you have any objection?
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
Exhibits 79, 79A, 79B, 80, 81, and 82 are admitted.
Permission to publish those for the court, Your Honor.
Permission granted.
Your Honor, if you'll give me 1 second, this screen's just a little bit on. Officer Kupo, looking at the screen showing Exhibit 79, can you tell the jury what specifically you are looking at in this photograph?
I'm looking at the damage to the door frame as well as the lock and door.
Were the damages that you see in this photo readily visible to you and apparent to you when you arrived at that location?
Yes.
States Exhibit 79A, tell us what we see in this photo, please.
This is an overall photograph of the external door at Mr. Shaw's business.
And 79B, tell us what you were attempting to capture in this photograph.
We are attempting to capture the hole in the door.
Your Honor, would the court object to me rotating that screen towards the jury more?
No.
Officer Kukla, would you look back in that book also at States Exhibits 81 and 82? And do you recognize those photos as well?
Yes.
And can you tell us what is depicted in those exhibits?
These are injuries to Mr. Shaw.
Were those injuries also part of the series of photos that you took on October 28th of 2018?
Yes.
Fair and accurate depictions of the injuries you saw to Andy Shaw?
Yes.
Your Honor, if the state could also move to have States Exhibits 81 and 82 admitted into evidence.
I believe we already admitted to Ms. Slaughter.
My apologies, Your Honor. Thank you. Can we also publish, Your Honor, States 80 through 82?
Certainly.
Officer Kugel, looking at State's Exhibit 80, tell us what we're seeing in this photograph, please.
We observed swelling and redness to his left orbital, as well as a small laceration underneath the left eyebrow to Mr. Shaw's face.
State's 81.
This is a small laceration on the back portion of Mr. Shaw's skull.
State's 82.
This photograph was to capture the dried and partially still wet blood on the left portion of Mr. Shaw's neck.
Officer Kugel, in your training and your experience, have you had the happy chance to observe injuries similar to this?
Yes.
Did these injuries appear to be new injuries or fresh injuries to you?
Yes.
Is it regular or common practice in your investigatory duties to attempt to speak to both parties involved in an investigation or an altercation?
Yes.
And did you speak with Christopher Bagley following the report that you received from Andy Shaw?
Yes.
In speaking with Mr. Bagley, were you able to get confirmation or denial whether or not he had contact with Andy Shaw on the evening of October 28th?
Yes.
And did he admit contact with Mr. Shaw?
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained.
Officer Kukla, as part of your investigation, were you able to gain entry to the Capitol Drive address?
No.
Why not?
The door was barricaded shut.
Did you attempt to get permission from Andy Shaw to enter that property?
Yes, we did.
And was that permission ever granted?
No.
Did you attempt more than once?
Yes.
Access denied each time?
That is correct.
Did you have any feelings about the denial of entry into that property?
I found it odd that he would not allow us to go investigate the scene of the crime.
Why?
Objection, Your Honor. This is not the subject of opinion testimony.
I didn't hear the objection, Your Honor.
You want to read it back, Ms. Schultz? If you got it.
The objection was, objection, Your Honor, this is not the subject of opinion testimony.
Counsel, I'm going to have you approach. The objection's overruled. Ms. Jellison, could you please read the witness the question back? And officer, I'm going to ask that you just listen carefully and answer the question that was posed.
The last question was why.
You can read back the one before.
Did you have any feelings about the denial of entry into that property?
Yes, it is typical for us to document the scene of the crime, so I believed it was odd that the victim did not want us to document it.
I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor.
Mr. Spees, do you have cross-exam?
Yes, briefly. Good morning.
Good morning.
Officer Drew Blahnik, in your testimony, you told the men and women of the jury and us that Mr. Shaw identified Christopher Bagley as being responsible for his injuries.
That is correct.
And didn't you say that there was somebody else there that also was responsible for some injuries?
There was a second person there, yes.
That tried to choke him out?
That is correct.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Ms. Slaughter, do you have redirect?
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Kugla, what was the description of the second perpetrator given by Mr. Shaw?
He stated it was a male, approximately 5'10" in height, with black or brown hair and a beard.
Were you able during this investigation, strike that, Your Honor, no further questions.
Any further cross-exam, Mr. Spees?
None necessary, thank you.
All right, you may step down, officer.
Thank you.
State, you may call your next witness.
May we approach, Your Honor?
You may. As sometimes happens with these things, we make efforts to predict how long things will take. We're a little ahead of the schedule we thought we were going to be on at this point, and so we don't have a witness in the hallway ready to come in. The next witness is going to be available at 1 p.m. today, so we're going to take a recess starting now until 1 p.m. We should be able to start back right at 1. Please remember your admonition during the recess.
All right.